here we are, it's 8:30, and I am going to officially launch the report that we've been working so hard on for the last few months, which we've entitled Roots of the Future, looking at the businesses that are regenerating Africa's soils. And I'm delighted to have with us a panel of incredible people who are not only very, very wise thinkers, but have that unique mix as well of being doers. So they are in the field, on the ground, implementing the things that they're talking about. And they have some fantastic experience to share with us. So I would encourage everyone to look at the intro poll. We have put together some questions that we hope will provoke you to consider some of the issues and share your thoughts. And please do engage in discussion in the chat to share what your thoughts are on some of those questions and on what you're hearing from our speakers today. So let me tell you a little bit about Footprints Africa, who is hosting this session. We believe that business can be a force for good. Our vision is a regenerative and inclusive world. And as part of that, we run a program in Ghana to support companies to improve their social and environmental performance. But what we've noticed is that we really need examples of what good looks like. And we need examples from a context that the companies we are working with can recognize. And so we embarked on this endeavor to collect case studies from across the continent of businesses engaging in the circular economy and more recently regenerative agriculture as part of that, to show that you don't need to go outside the continent for inspiration. There are incredible things happening and incredible people leading these initiatives. So for the regenerative agriculture, the reason for choosing that as our first thematic report is probably obvious to many of you. Agriculture is so central to most African economies. And we're seeing that conventional agriculture is not working for people and the planet. One of the approaches that we take in the work that we do is not to position ourselves as experts or scientists, but to really go on the ground and see what's happening and who's leading that. And so what we'll be doing today, and you don't want to hear too much of my voice, because the point is to give the voice to those who are doing this work. What we have noticed with regenerative agriculture, and as my colleague Hugo coined it, is that the transition is radical, it's simple, and it's complex. And what we mean by that is it's radical because it really is counter to the current practices and the current thinking of very linear models to a much more holistic approach, which our panel will tell you about. It's very simple because the solutions are there. We're going to present some to you now. And it's complex because putting those solutions into action is challenging. And working within systems that have a different way of thinking is challenging. The way we are approaching this is looking at businesses and organizations on the ground. So I am not going to speak much more myself. And as part of giving the voice to those doing this, I'm actually going to ask those here to introduce themselves. So Deborah, if you'd like to show the next slide so we can share who our panelists are, who we've got with us today. And Dr. Boa, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself and share your organization, what you do, your big picture vision for what this can look like, and why are you doing this work? So please, Dr. Boa, if you'd like to lead.
Good. Thank you very much. My name is Kofi Boa, and I'm the founder and director of the Center for No-Till Agriculture here in Ghana. This is a center that has been set up to show the benefits and evidence of conservation agriculture so that the technology can sell itself to farmers. This is very important because the majority of food producers who have fed Africa for a very long time and are going to do it deep into the future are in the smallholder category. And most of them do not have that much education to be able to synthesize results, research data from the print, from internet, and make sense out of that. They are the people that have to see it, feel it, believe it, and go for it. And so this center has been set up to show the benefits to them so that, and the evidence, and then as well as the processes, so it sits in their face. And for sure, there is no one that has experienced what we do and has never made a commitment to go for regenerative agriculture. Our big picture in doing all this is that We surely want to see the whole of Africa by the end of the current decade to go for regenerative agriculture. And I'm so passionate doing this because, you see, we in Africa have a unique characteristic. The point is that when other nations are striving towards the zero population growth, we haven't heard anything. In sub-Saharan Africa, especially, population keeps rising. And every single person has to be fed and fed on a daily basis. But the irony of the whole thing is that as population is growing and more people have to be fed, the land area on which we grow food to feed ourselves is declining. The desert is expanding. We see floods coming from the coast, and within the interior, there is so much degradation coming from deforestation, illegal mining. And so those of us who have gone deep into this know the potential, then have to commit ourselves to ensuring that we are able to prove to everybody, not just farmers and the general public, that regenerative agriculture holds the way to sustaining our environment, our food security system, and therefore sustenance of life on Earth.
Beautiful, thank you, Kofi. Arti, please do share about yourself and your work.
Thank you. So I'm Artisha, I'm the co-lead of the CoRegen Consortium. And CoRegen is on a regenerative agriculture, energy and carbon dioxide removal journey. And if I zoom in, our first mission is to decarbonize tea. And by that, I mean replacing incineration with gasification to dry tea leaves and to power machinery. And the byproduct, biochar, is an excellent conditioner for African soils. It's also a stable form of carbon, but it will not only remove carbon dioxide, it will also retain water, it'll reduce fertilizer use and help increase yields. So my own role is to turn the model into a viable business strategy, and I also manage external relations and communications. And I'm doing this because it's necessary, complex, to use your earlier word, and achievable. It's systems change that requires persistence, and I'm particularly good at that.
Fantastic, thank you. And Tavi, tell us about 1 Billion Trees.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure meeting all of you, and thank you, Joanna, Ugo, and the rest. It's amazing always to talk about 1 billion trees. It's a story, but I'll be very brief with that story. In 2004, on an eve when I had packed my bags, I wanted to join my friends to travel to Niger and across the Sahara to migrate to Europe. And at that night, at around midnight, when I went to just do meditation, then I was in between the choice of going on that journey or the choice of not going. Then a very big question came to my mind. The money, the little money that I have in my hands, where did I get it from? And, you know, I got it from producing local soap from castor soap, from castor and renewable materials from the forest. So I got that money and I asked myself, if I had this money within this little time that I was able to realize this amount of money, how much more will I get if I have to stay back and do this? Is it worth the pain? Is it worth the risk? So after that point, I told myself I wouldn't go on that trip. And we had arranged with our friends to leave by 5:30 in the morning. So we could, before it's daybreak, when people will see our movement, we would have gone kilometers away out of the village. So from that moment, when I took that decision, I asked myself, this is a resource from land restoration and a renewable resource from my own environment. So what can I do more that many other people can change their mind at the eve of their journey, or even before they think about that journey through the Sahara and the Mediterranean, which is risky. So I thought that Africa has 1 billion people. And why not? if each African looks symbolically at the billion Africa, we can actually create a billion wealth and a billion trees that can restore these landscape, which the gentleman Kofi talked about, how it is increasingly getting deforested, degraded, and desertified by different catastrophic impacts. So that is the story of 1 billion trees. I told myself I would rather be planting and growing trees to create more wealth for myself and for those who are vulnerable. And now we are very happy that what we are doing has spread across the Sahara on camel and has moved across the streams on boat and canoes. And it is now a legacy that has actually informed the new revolution across Africa today, where you see more and more young people are getting involved in restoration. And we are happy that we are now delivering the most holistic nature capital or nature wonder of the world, which is a great green wall. And that's the story.
Thank you, Kabi. That's a very it's a very personal take, and it's wonderful to see someone connecting that to the issues of migration, which I think probably don't get enough of that connection. So I really appreciate that sharing that personal journey. Neil, please tell us about yourself and Regenerative Resources.
Hi, folks. I'm Neil Spackman. I'm co-founder and current CEO of Regenerative Resources. My personal background, professional background is in hyper-arid agroforestries, particularly in the Arabian Peninsula. But with Regenerative Resources, we are focused on coastal landscape and coastal communities. We are the developers of a system that we call regenerative seawater agriculture, where we work entirely with water from the ocean to transform degraded coastal landscapes into a set of mangrove agroforestries. So we combine halophytic agriculture, which is agricultures and crops that grow in seawater, with regenerative agriculture through agroforestries and silvopastures. In Africa, we are operating in Ghana today. We have a really phenomenal team in the Volta Delta, east of Accra. We have grown tens of thousands of mangroves in the last 6 months, but we have an eye toward 5,000 hectares of mangrove reforestation, along with 1,500 to 2,000 hectares of these regenerative seawater agricultures. And all along coastal communities across the planet, the pattern that we see is that fishery depletion is severe. We're working with communities where their catch has decreased by more than 90% in the last 2 decades. And so you have a severe degradation of the primary resource, which is the fishery, and that's leading to people to turn to deforestation of the mangroves, which exacerbates erosion and exacerbates poverty. And so where you have this cycle of poverty and ecological degradation, our approach is to combine ecological restoration with regenerative economic development under the premise that if degradation and poverty are linked to each other so strongly, then wealth and functioning ecosystems and functioning ecologies are also connected, and that we can create wealth through agroecology and ecological restoration. So we're focused on deployment of our seawater systems globally. In Africa, we are most ahead in Ghana, but also have an eye to developing projects in the next 12 months in Namibia, Mozambique, and potentially the Red Sea region. And the first iteration of this system was done in Eritrea from 1999 to 2004 under the leadership of one of my co-founders and the late great scientist Carl Hodges. So that's what we're up to at Regenerative Resources.
Fantastic. Busy. So one of the things I'm so fascinated by for all of you is how have the communities you work in responded to the work you're doing, and what's been your approach to engaging them? So maybe we'll start with Arti.
Okay. So in our case, the communities are both the tea farmers and the producers, so the tea factories or companies in Kenya. And that's, as I said, that's our first mission. And we've had really positive reception so far. You know, they want to reduce their dependency on wood. A lot of them are farming wood, you know, just in order to sort of incinerate it to dry the tea leaves. And to give you an idea, we're talking in the order of hundreds of thousands of tons of wood every year. They like the idea of our removing tea prunings from the fields. They're either seen to be a fire hazard or, you know, in some cases they sort of keep them there as mulch, but that has its own challenges. And they love the idea of biochar. It's not actually a very difficult thing to explain to them because they've had experience of seeing charcoal on the tea farms and the impact on productivity. So I think I'd say until now, certainly from the immediate stakeholders, if you like, the producers of the tea, there's been a lot of receptivity.
Fantastic. And Neil, has your experience been the same with your communities?
It's for us, community engagement is part of the pre-development phase. There is a long process to it, particularly if we are approaching the community instead of being invited initially. But for us, because we partner with coastal communities, we seek to maximize both the implementation of local knowledge, local labor and local expertise, and try to bring in as little from outside as necessary. So for instance, in Ghana, our leadership is a team of folks who have extensive experience in aquacultures, in sea turtle conservation, in a mix of both economic and ecological backgrounds. And then it's a process, because we are talking about large tracts of land and integrating that with numbers of communities, which may not necessarily be from the same tribe or even from the same first language. We've got an extensive process of how do you get local people involved? How do you gain their trust? How do you integrate them as employees or local leaders? And there's always opposition of one kind. There are also always early adopters and champions who come out of the woodwork, as well as solutions that we haven't thought of that emerge from this process that inevitably get integrated into the vision of what we try to do. One particular example is in one project that we're doing, we hadn't considered doing mangrove reforestation, but an older woman who was part of our community engagement process said, look, we know that our fishery is going and we are fishing people. And we also understand that if we bring mangroves back, it's going to increase the health of our fishery. So instead of just economic stuff, can we do mangrove reforestation in addition to these other programs we're talking about? And we said, well, yes, let's add a reforestation project to the list of things that we want to do here, which I don't have experience in, but we have a number of NGOs and other organizations that are willing to partner with us on it. So it's a very fluid process. It's a very dynamic process. We don't go into places and say, hey, here are the solutions to all your problems. It's a very integrated and quite quickly within that process, it is a locally driven thing where solutions that people already have but may not have the capacity to execute are integrated into the greater set of programs that we try to do.
That's incredibly exciting to hear. Kofi, has your experience been similar?
Yes, for sure. I mean, just like all that they've been talking about. See, we really work with communities. And what really has happened is that we know what to do. So the change is not about ourselves. The change is about the people who form the community, far and near. And what has happened is that we have had so much recognition coming from the fact that farmers are seeing evidence and benefits. In situations like earlier, about a decade ago, farmers preparing land in my home, where we have our center now, towards the end of the dry season and beginning of the rainy season, we'll go and just carry a little bit of an open container, put a bit of kerosene in it, set it in the middle of the farm, and then they will just light it and it will go boom. In other words, their land preparation method was the bomb, making noise. And by the next day, the whole area is burnt. People's cocoa farm burnt, just as I experienced as a small boy. And so we then set up this center. And from there, we have won the community. And as I speak to you now, a lot of the extension that is going on is not even done by my group. It's done by farmer to farmer sort of thing. And so that is expanding. And I have been in this business, smallholder farmer promotion for life, but this is where I have seen smallholder farmers coming together, sourcing for support, not to buy inputs, not to prepare their land, but sourcing for support to be transported to my center to see and learn, because they have heard it from their colleagues. They want to experience it themselves.
And so I'm going to have to find someone to give me support to take me to your center.
That gives so much inspiration. And the good thing about this is that we are grateful that several NGOs are now responding to this, like GIZ and several other Vibrant Villages Foundation, both local and international, ensuring that farmers get to experience regenerative agriculture, the evidence, the benefits, and the processes. And so we keep on engaging with communities, and this is something that we are going to continue to do, because we want to make sure that the very last person on the African continent changes.
Tabi, over to you and your community work.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm very happy that we're all in synchrony. And of course, I want to reiterate that regenerative agriculture, it's the way to go for the entire world, not just Africa. You know, so for me, I'm coming from the background where, as I explained to you, just from a little bit of change of mind, we started creating what is now called a model center for regenerative agroforestry and agroecology. I guess you must have seen that, with your eyes. So these actually, became the solution, not just for restoration of land, when in the first few years we restored 80 hectares of land. And it was not just a physical restoration. We saw the economic, the ecosystem benefits, the green growth benefit that delivered social results, like jobs that came from the value chains that we created, and resulting to over 89 jobs, for young people and women. And because there is no value, there is no impact if the social condition of people doesn't change. And if the landscape that is degraded doesn't have a physical change or transformation, there is no point. So these now actually move from one community to another through example and practice across 33 communities in 11 countries in the Sahel, making one of the biggest results in the Lake Chad, where the Lake Chad, which is known to be a highly degraded area, now seemingly having a luscious pasture and restored landscapes. And very significantly, this also brought 6 young people back from Libya after their failed attempt to migrate across the Mediterranean, which they are currently working with us now and restoring landscape, having viable income from restoration opportunities. So for me, I consider regenerative agriculture as the most strongest base for sustainability, because it offers not just land, it offers income, it offers jobs, it offers a social security, it offers the cohesion that is needed in societies to reduce vulnerabilities to disasters, to hazards, and to violence.
So Tabby, I think all of you have, and I think this is one of the reasons we wanted to have all of you on the panel. All of you are doing incredible work in the community and working with communities very closely. But turning to think about the governments, if you could each share a couple of specific actions that you want to see from governments to help scale this transition, because the work you're doing in the individual communities is fantastic. As you mentioned, Dr. Boer, you just need to come and see it to believe it. What do we need? What specific actions do we need from the government to accelerate this transition?
Well, thank you. For me, what I've realized in all this that I've been doing is that the people really need to see it, to believe it, and go for it. But the question is, do we have that strong army of change agents? And how do we create this change agent? The point is that we have schools all over Africa, and there is nowhere that you go and you find that within the curriculum there is a session devoted to regenerative agriculture. It's all about the conventional thing we have experienced over and over and over. And so if we are to scale this up within the shortest possible time, we need people who are well-versed, not just in knowledge, but in practice, to flash out the system, to be everywhere, to get down and kick the dirt with the farmers, work out there in the rural communities with them and show them the processes, the value, and the benefits. Because when the practitioners themselves, everywhere around the continent, gets to take it, our governments cannot sit back. It will be spontaneous, but we have to show so that they get confidence, they believe in it. So what I want to see is streamlining RA education in our educational systems, especially at the tertiary level, where we are turning out professionals coming and working with the farmers. When it is deeply engraved here and they have the passion and looking ahead, they will be, there is no way we cannot get it.
Education. Tabby.
There is not really much absence of these practices, but what needs now is enhancement. Like Neil said, I so much agree with that point. How do we unlock these opportunities? How do we unleash the potential for these to thrive as an economic potential, as an economic catalyst, so that it can create the jobs? There is already so much knowledge out there, but there is very little practice. So how can we scale? Government should scale investment in this direction. That's very important one. And the second point is we have to look at the market. There is no point for producing a product where there is no market. So market is just one point. How do we create a catalyst for markets to emerge at different levels where these products, no matter where they are produced, they can be consumed? That's two. Then there's also not just market. How can we create an equitable system? We want governments to intervene in creating that equitable system where buyers don't buy by exploitation, where there is equitable production from the farm to fork, where the farmer who produces have substantial, worthy, proportionate income from what they produce. This is very important. If we scale regenerative agriculture, people can produce as much as they can. But if they don't have, there's no point producing when there's no one going to buy it. So how can we look at this? there should be a big catalyst from governments, from corporate organizations on this aspect. Then 4 is the infrastructure.
I can see Artie's unmuted herself. She's ready to dive in there. Artie,
yes,
let me hand to you.
infrastructure is very important. There is a lot of food waste, as we all already know. So much of the degradation of the food that is produced from communities, they don't ever get to the market.
Tabby, can I just hand over to Artie, and we're going to come back to markets later on?
Yeah, sure. These are the points that I think government needs to really work on.
So I'd say that I think government, particularly where Kenya and the Kenyan tea sector is concerned, since, as I keep saying, that's my mission at the moment, is really taking a holistic approach, right? As you've seen, co-regen is complex. So the first thing is to consider changing agricultural policies and practices, stopping new mulch and instead adding biochar. Secondly, the Ministry of Energy should see that gasification itself is not the issue. It's ensuring a reliable supply chain of feedstock, one that, by the way, farmers should be paid for. So that goes back to agriculture. But the gasification ecosystem should feed into Kenya's bioenergy strategy 2020-2027. Third, the Environment Ministry needs to understand the benefits of turning low-grade, high-carbon waste that has no competing uses into energy that emits and pollutes less than the incumbent incineration. And also, biochar removes carbon dioxide, so good for the environment. Then there's Treasury, which manages carbon credits, the Revenue Authority, which should remove all taxes and duties on gasification equipment, Trade and Industrialization, which should review the UK-Kenya Economic Partnership Agreement in what's known as the Trade and Sustainable Development Chapter. And you can look at the EFTA Indonesia CEPA on palm oil, as a sort of lesson to be learned, and so on.
That's incredibly thorough. Thank you, Artie. Any governments listening, there's your blueprint. Neil, if there's anything possible you could add to all of that.
Well, I think I would take a wider view. A few weeks ago, there was the UN Conference on Agriculture in New York. There's going to be a lot of talk about agriculture at COP in a couple of weeks. And this is where the world's governments get together. And one of the things they talk about is what kind of agricultures are we going to do in Africa? And this is, everybody's got an interest in it, right? It's not just African governments and African people is interested in African agriculture. It's the entire world. And I would, if I had my druthers, I would encourage African politicians and leaders to take a look at what are the agricultures that multinational corporations are trying to export to Africa from northern countries, and what have the effects of those been in the places where I come from, in the United States and Europe and China and elsewhere? Because what we are dealing with here as a result of those agricultures is massive soil loss, an exacerbation of drought and flood cycles, dead zones in our oceans, deforestation of most of our forests, right? Most of the United States forests that were here 300 years ago are now greatly depleted. And that will be the result if these more industrialized agricultures become the dominant model of practice in Africa. And it will last for a couple of hundred years and feed a lot of people. But the fundamental resources, which are soil, water, and ecology, are extremely degraded where these practices have taken place. And that's not a problem that's a couple of hundreds of years old. That's a problem that's thousands of years old and always accompanies monocrop ag. So I would encourage governments and politicians and leaders to take the longer view and to try to understand that the fight happening over what agriculture in Africa looks like. We can choose to degrade the fundamental resources on which we all depend, or we can choose to maintain them through regenerative systems and agroecologies. And that long-term view really ought to be informing policy, because even though agriculture as it's practiced in a place like Iowa, for instance. Iowa is the heart of the breadbasket of the United States. But recent studies are showing that millions of acres of Iowa are now devoid of topsoil, right? We cannot degrade the fundamental resources on which we all depend and hope to continue to produce food for a growing population. And I think if that understanding were more widespread, it would lead to the form, maybe it's naive of me to say, but that understanding would lead to the formation of better policy that recognize the value of those fundamental resources.
Thank you, Neil. I think, you know, what we're seeing is these conventional imported methods are not even working in the places they're being imported from, based on what you're saying there. So obviously there's some very clear asks from government, from all of you there, but we know that government processes take time, to put it euphemistically. So taking examples from your own work, what can be done in the meantime while we're waiting for this to happen? And can you share some specific examples of what can be done? And I'll let whoever wants to go first speak there, but we are running quite short on time, so I'll ask you to be really concise with your comments so that everyone can say something.
Joanna, please. Sorry, I was still sharing and to land on the recommendations, which I think are very key. You know, and I'm happy with Neil's perspective talking about the degradation of the fundamental resource, which is land. Last time when we discussed, I told you about how regenerative agriculture is practiced on the platform of indigenous knowledge practices. That is what has kept Africa's soils fertile for all these generations. And that's why I insist that what I'm practicing is traditional or indigenous agroforestry system. So one of the things I'm going to send from the walls of this meeting is that African governments should start raising an eyebrow on stopping reckless Chinese exploitation of Africa's resources. There is no country in this world or no nation should allow its doors or its landscapes where even saplings of trees that will grow for future agriculture, are destroyed. So we should open our we should speak out to this. I am speaking to African governments. We need to have a stop to these reckless exploitation and also create very strong policy frameworks where those who are buying African resources should buy it on equitable trading terms, where we should not see more destruction of human, because we're not only seeing degradation of landscape, there is also degradation of human life, human dignity. How can people's dignity be supported, sustained, and maintained through these practices? It has to do with policy frameworks that strengthen this equality system. I want to produce my crop. I want to have a fair share of the price of my product, and it should not destroy my landscape, because my children will have to enjoy this landscape freely without fertilizer, without pesticides, without herbicides, like my parents and my grandparents and their initial parents did. This is a recommendation I am sending from here. Before I go, perhaps in sharing what I feel from my point. Landscape restoration through indigenous agroforestry, regenerative agroforestry is very key in driving not just economic growth, but of course, creating a new ecological system in a globe that is heavily impacted by climate risk and disasters. So from one hectare to another hectare, let's see that young people have jobs doing these practices in their communities, doing it in a dignified way that they actually feel very comfortable doing it where they stay. So that we also reduce the influx of reckless migration, irregular migration. So we also reduce the degradation that is creating excessive disasters and extreme weather events that are displacing humans from their own natural habitats. It is not only the urge for migration, but the forced movement, the forced displacement by these extreme weather events like droughts. Like Neil said, drought is very key. Right now we are seeing drought in Kenya, in Angola, in Madagascar, and of course, potentially in Niger and Nigeria, and in Somalia and Ethiopia. What should we do about this? It is because of the absence of this restoration
practices through regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture, I say, is the most important thing for sustainability. Whether you call it climate smart agriculture, whether you call it resilience, what, in as much as it is not based on that natural regeneration, it is worthless.
Tabia, it's very clear to see why you're so passionate when you see these issues and you see how they're impacting humans on the ground. Thank you for sharing with us so passionately. Kofi.
Taking it from Tabi. I mean, he said it, that there is so much that is known already, and it is true. There is so much that is known already, but known by who? We have people having the knowledge in their heads. We have knowledge in books. We have learned knowledge in peer-reviewed papers, and that will mean nothing to the strategy of scaling up here if the people on the ground who matter, the smallholder farmers for that matter in Africa, don't get to see, don't get to experience. So for me, what I'm saying is that we should have the opportunity of showcasing the benefit and evidence so that we're able to get people to go for it. And for me, I would want to see a replication of the centers like what I have, what Tabi has, and what all of us are doing, scattered all over the continent. And that is the way to go, because we will never, ever sound convincing enough if we have nothing to show on the ground.
Artie, you're nodding. Artie, go ahead, please. And then I'm going to share some of the findings from the poll, and then we're going to take questions from the audience with the 5 minutes we have left.
Sure. So yeah, I'm just building on what's already been said, but if I go zoom in, let's use biochar. African soils are mostly older than the dinosaurs, unlike Europe. So what's happening in Europe won't necessarily be applicable here. And I do realize that, we are talking about investing in equipment, but biochar reduces evaporation. It creates micropores inside the soil that are better at holding water. And we all know in countries like Kenya, water and lack of water and unpredictable rains is an issue. It's also, as I keep saying, a fantastic way of removing sort of carbon dioxide, right? And unlike perhaps some of the current practices like mulching and unlike some of the other ongoing changes in the tea sector that we have around mechanization of picking and pruning, etc., this is something that again is climate friendly, right? So I would really suggest that we go down that route, see the benefits on yields, and see therefore on incomes, and take it from there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly look at the polls. We haven't found a way to share the polls, so I'm going to be very analog and just look on my screen to see. So we asked the audience what everyone thinks. Is Africa a carbon sink or a carbon emitter? And we had 24 people respond that it's a carbon sink and 7 people respond that it's a carbon emitter. Artie, would you like to share the answer?
It's a carbon emitter. And that is because of land use changes, including sort of deforestation. So net, Africa is a carbon emitter.
And it shouldn't be that way. Thank you.
And everything we've been talking about can mitigate that. So.
Absolutely. So the next question we asked was, can regenerative agriculture feed Africa? 25 out of 26 respondents said yes. So we are preaching to the converted here. We also asked, what is the role of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides in regenerative agriculture? So we had the answers being they have no role. The intention is to minimize their use, but they still have a use, and they are very necessary. 7 out of 25 says they have no role here. 16 out of 25, so the majority, say the intention is to minimize their use, but they still have a use. And 2 out of 25 says they are very necessary. So slightly mixed answers there. We also asked, where can regenerative agriculture be practiced? 19 out of 24 believe it can be in tropical climates, 20 out of 24 in temperate climates, 11 out of 24 say the desert, and 9 out of 24 say the ocean. Neil, where can regenerative agriculture be practiced?
We restored an area that had been undergone at least a century of desertification, that sometimes it did not rain for 30 to 36 months at a time, and our average was 50 millimeters a year. and we converted this. This is in the middle of the Saudi desert. We converted a 100-acre site into a functioning silvopasture, allowed for the rehabilitation of indigenous land management systems related to pastoralism. So I've done it in hyper-arid desert contexts. And we've also done it on desert coastlines where there is no fresh water whatsoever. And we converted those sites into mangrove agroforestries, and we're producing shrimp and shellfish and tilapia, animal fodder, medicinal compounds, and a number of other products came off of that site that were being exported to the EU. So even in places where there is zero fresh water whatsoever, there are regenerative agricultures that can be implemented, utilizing seawater. So there, in regenerative resources, we've taken on some of the most challenging climates on the planet and converted extremely degraded landscapes into functioning agroforestries or silvopastures. So there's every climate, every geography has a system that can be managed sustainably. And as Tabi said, it is looking to indigenous peoples, indigenous systems, and indigenous cultures that gives us the baseline for where we should start from.
So the last question we have is, which should African governments prioritize? And we had technology and innovation or regenerative agriculture. And so the audience believes 10 out of 25 believes that technology and innovation should be the priority for African governments, whereas 15 out of 25 say it's regenerative agriculture. So there are a few people that maybe still need a bit more convincing from the team here. So we've got 2 questions. I'm going to start with this one. So, and literally a word from each of you or a word from a couple of you. So do you think that agroforestry initiatives from the United Nations, like REDD+, encourage or discourage regenerative agriculture in Africa? Maybe you could say encourage or discourage. We don't really have time to qualify it. Does anyone have a view?
The devil's in the details on that one.
Yeah.
I've seen good ways that was implemented and ways that it looked more like a shakedown.
Perfect. So we've now got time for each of you to share your final thought. What do you want to leave everyone here with? Just 30 seconds max to share from each of you. Neil, since you started, let's start with you.
Okay. There are 2 major sets of problems we're dealing with. There's human issues and environmental issues. And we only ever deal with one set by exacerbating the other. Right? If we want to build an economy, we destroy the ecosystem to do it. If we want to protect an ecosystem, we put it in preservation and prevent people from accessing the resources on those sites. And until policy and people and practices in general recognize that economy and ecology and ecosystems are inextricably connected, we will never solve both sets of those issues until we learn how connected they are. And
Thank you so much.
That's my 30 seconds.
Thank you. It was 50, but that's okay. Tabi.
Yeah, mine is that we must create a balance. There is a need for a balance. And if there is anything countries need to do, Africa needs to swing to its strength. It is an naturally endowed continent with lots of natural assets. Technology should be unlocking from the forest, from the landscapes, from the seas, from the desert. Technology does not necessarily mean a cell phone or a computer. It simply means how a bed can be constructed for people to sit on, from bamboo and from the raffia and from grass, and how tools and utensils can be created for human use, but all should be regenerative, sustainable, resilient, and safe for ecology and human. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Arti.
I'd say start. Don't wait for perfection or certainly the government. Our minimum viable product is focusing on the soil health through gasification and a robust supply chain first, before we tackle other regenerative agriculture principles. And by the way, if you do have more questions, please come to the Cobalt Partners virtual booth immediately after this. We'll be more than happy to engage.
Thank you, Ati. And final words, Kofi.
Okay, any further delay or missed action on the development, on scaling up the development and promotion of conservation, regenerative agriculture might lead to the breakdown of ecosystem services and unproductive soils, which will lead to the denial of future food security. So we employ everybody listening to us today to join us in pushing regenerative agriculture. Thank you.
A powerful call to action. Thank you so much to all of you for your wisdom. We could have spoken for hours, I know, and sorry to have to cut you off. For the report, which will be released this week, you'll find it on our website, and we have some links as well for where you can find more information. And please do reach out to the wonderful speakers, and anything you can do to support and help them in the work that they're doing and make sure that that gets to scale will be absolutely critical. Thank you so much to everyone. It's really been a pleasure to be part of this.